Right friends, this is the last capsule for week number 37. This is read between the lines. We are going to deliberate three issues. One is on national health accounts. The second one is on ceasefire announced by United States of America and Russia in Syria. And third one is with regard to lifting of sanctions by USA on Myanmar. Then let us look at the first one, national health accounts. And what do you understand by it? Basically, national health accounts gives one idea with regard to the expenditure pattern, how people are getting medical facilities, whether it is through insurance companies, whether it is through out-of-pocket expenditure, whether it is through the governments, and how much percentage is spent by center, how much percentage is spent by states, how much percentage is spent by the residents from their pocket. So these are all the aspects when we look at the national health accounts which will be evident. And India released the national health accounts after a gap of 9 years. Normally, developed nations and some of the developing economies release national health accounts almost once in a year. Even some countries release national health accounts twice in a year. And for India, last national health accounts were released during the year 2004-05, and after that, the recent ones released pertaining to the financial year 2013-14. So, health data was released after a gap of 9 years. And as I have already told you, basically this data will be useful to understand how money is spent on health, then from where the money comes from, then how the expenditure flow to healthcare providers. So, this statistical information is available through national health accounts, and after knowing these statistical information, governments can plan their pattern of expenditure, right? So this is basically useful to track financial resources and also to make necessary course corrections by the governments of the day. Then, as a matter of fact, Indians spent 8 times more on private hospitals in comparison to the amount spent in government hospitals. Right friends, let us look at a cursory look at the total health expenditure. During 2013-14, total health expenditure 4.5 lakh crores of rupees. And this includes everything spent by governments, spent by households, spent by insurance companies, whoever may be spending, but the total expenditure during 2013-14 stands at 4.5 lakh crores of rupees, and out of which capital expenditure means for creation of assets like hospitals. So, for creation of assets, the expenditure is around 7% or 31,900 crores of rupees. And if you look at current expenditure means for getting the service, for operations, for different types of medicines. So, all those things put together, day-to-day expenditure spent in the country is rupees 4,21,000 crores, or you can say 93%. And here, this 4,21,000 crores of rupees, how it came from? If you look into that aspect, 73% came from households and 13% came from state governments. Around 8% came from central government, and this 73% came from households. And if you deduct the expenditure taken care by insurance providers, then out of pocket expenditure or OOP stands at around 64%. That is the most worrying factor in the country. What will happen when the medical expenditure comes from the pocket? Then there is every possibility that people will relegate into poverty. because this out-of-pocket expenditure will be very high and poor people may not be able to spend that much, and sometimes they spend by borrowing from others at very high interest rates, and this leads them into the trap of poverty. So for any country, out-of-pocket expenditure must be as minimum as possible, but in our country it is around 64-65%, which is not at all acceptable. And if you look at the points of concern, government's spending on health is just 1.15% of GDP. If you compare it with Thailand, Thailand spends 5.6% of GDP on health. Then China 3.1%, even poor Nepal with 2.3%, and neighboring Sri Lanka spends 2%. And we spend 1.15%. I am talking about government spending on health as percentage of GDP, that is 1.15%. It is abysmally less. Out of this, 0.75% of GDP comes from state governments and 0.4% comes from the central government. And now government's expenditure includes various forms of insurance. This 1.15% includes various forms of insurance also, because nowadays insurance is being given for various sectors of people, and if you exclude that, then government's expenditure comes to 0.9%. This is almost the same if you look at the expenditure in 2004-05. So no improvement as far as the government spending on health is concerned. And if you compare with other nations, India fares poorly even when we compare with the sub-Saharan African countries. Sub-Saharan African countries, please look into this slide. And these are sub-Saharan African countries. And when do we reach the dream of spending 2.5% of GDP as promised by government quite often, right? As I have already told you, Thailand with the 5.6% of GDP is an example, and the expenditure on health by the neighboring countries will act as a grim reminder to India. And if you look at the other aspects, household healthcare expenditure, as I have already told you, it is 73%, and if we subtract expenditure through insurance, the out-of-pocket expenditure comes to 64% of health expenditure. That is the most worrying point. Then with such high percentage of out-of-pocket expenditure, people are being pushed into poverty trap. And Thailand almost brought 75% of the population with the universal health coverage within just 1 year. And another important aspect is, out of rupees 10 spent on health, rupees 4 is going towards medicines. And only the expenditure on medicines is pushing about 30 to 35 million people into poverty. Then investments on preventive health care are abysmally low, just less than 1/10 of the total spending. So these are the realities in this country, and the need of the hour is preventive health care. And if you look at the details of the need of the hour, first and the foremost is reduce out-of-pocket expenditure burden on households urgently. No country can afford 64% of the total expenditure on health from out-of-pocket. Then second thing is, put the centralized system of procurement of essential drugs. Essential drugs may be generic medicines, high quality generic medicines can be procured centrally by the central government, and then central government can distribute to the state governments. And third point is, as per the Planning Commission estimates, spending just 0.5% of GDP will ensure the availability of medicines free of cost to all the Indians. Then fourth point is, form regulatory authorities in states to lay down costs for various medical procedures. Some hospital charges 30,000 rupees for surgery. The same surgery is done by some other doctor with rupees 10,000, and here patients do not have any idea, there is no regulatory measure. So, form regulatory authorities in states to lay down costs for medical procedures under various classes and strictly implement them. Then finally, look at the process of implementing universal health coverage in a phased manner, right? So, this is the need of the hour. So, the national health accounts act as a grim reminder to the country that all is not well if you look at the health sector as a whole. Look into the second one, that is ceasefire by United States of America, Russia in Syria. And I have told you several times, there are three prominent players in Syria. The first prominent player is the government led by its president Bashar al-Assad, supported by Russia and Iran. Then main opposition parties who want Bashar al-Assad to go is basically supported by United States of America, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries. So this group number one is supported by Russia, predominantly supported by Shia group of countries. Main opposition parties supported by United States of America and Sunni group of Arab countries. Then the third group is organizations like IS, Islamic State, then Jabhat Fateh al-Sham, because these type of groups occupied substantial areas of the country. So these three predominant players are there in Syria. The third group includes several terrorist organizations, but prominent among them is Islamic State as well as Jabhat Fateh al-Sham. And this lecture I want to concentrate on what is the difference between truce, cessation of hostilities, ceasefire, then armistice, then peace deal. And with regard to Syria, we discussed previously under news analysis. Please view it. You can understand the Syria problem completely. Now I am concentrating on differentiating between certain terminology, because in the news item itself, some newspapers quoted the ceasefire and initial news reports are with regard to cessation of hostilities, then truce. So what is the exact difference between truce, cessation of hostilities, ceasefire, then the next one is armistice, then peace agreement. So if you start from truce, truce is basically an ad hoc arrangement, a temporary arrangement just to stop fighting. Normally, truce, warring groups will announce after mutual exhaustion of intensive fighting. After the mutual exhaustion of intensive fighting, this truce is announced, and it is totally ad hoc in nature. It is temporary. It may be in only specific areas, and formal negotiations subsequently may not take place also, right? Then second step is cessation of hostilities. Cessation of hostilities is more formal than truce. Truce is totally informal. This cessation of hostilities is a somewhat formal arrangement in comparison to truce. Basically, it indicates willingness to stop fighting and with a strategy of wait and see. That means when cessation of hostilities are announced, it may lead to permanent ceasefire. Right? If you look at the ceasefire, it is a negotiated agreement. Negotiated agreement to stop fighting, and it will be accompanied by other associated commitments also to de-escalate fighting, and it may mean withdrawal of weapons also. So this is basic difference between truce, cessation of hostilities, ceasefire. And next two steps, armistice, then peace agreement. Armistice normally followed by peace agreement. But in South Korea, North Korea case, the matter ended with armistice only. Armistice was signed between South Korea and North Korea in 1953. Subsequently, peace agreement could not be signed. So here, armistice means it is a legally binding agreement, basically with a view to end war or civil war, right? So this is just one step behind final peace agreement, and with efforts to negotiate a lasting peace agreement and just one step away from signing peace agreement. Then finally it is a peace agreement, that is between two or more hostile parties, and it ends finally the state of war between the parties. So this is the difference between this terminology. So please understand and please apply as and when the situation arises the right and apt word. So look at the last one for the week, that is United States of America lifts most of the sanctions against Myanmar. All of you are familiar with Myanmar. Now Aung San Suu Kyi recently took over as a state councillor. She cannot become president because of constitutional bar. That's why she became state councillor, and she is the leader of National League for Democracy. And recently America announced lifting of sanctions against Myanmar. What are these sanctions? All of you are well aware that military junta ruled Myanmar for more than 5 decades, and when Myanmar was under military rule, on the issue of human rights abuses, United States of America imposed certain trade sanctions. That means at that time, in the year 1989, United States of America suspended trade benefits given to poorer nations. There are generalized system of preferences given by America to poorer nations, by which it exempts certain countries from high import duties. That means there is a special clause in America that is known as generalized system of preferences. Under generalized system of preferences, some poorer countries were exempted from high import duties. But here in the year 1989, because of human rights abuses, sanctions were imposed, and in the year 1989, Myanmar was withdrawn from generalized system of preferences, and now United States of America recently decided to lift the sanctions. And please look into this slide. The Myanmar capital is Naypyidaw, and Myanmar has got borders with the 4 Indian states, that is Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram. This thing please don't forget. And with regard to the lifting of sanctions against Myanmar, several experts pointed out that it is too premature and America has taken hasty decision because democracy is yet to return completely in Myanmar. Even 3 key ministries are held by military junta. Not only that, the constitution was framed by military junta. So under these circumstances, lifting of sanctions by America came as a surprise for the experts. Experts felt that the sanctions should not be lifted till democracy is operational completely in Myanmar. Second important aspect is, as per the constitution drafted by the military, even Aung San Suu Kyi cannot become president, and it is too early to lift the sanctions. Basically, sanctions are required to keep pressure on military. Otherwise, military will not allow 100% democracy to come to Myanmar, and when sanctions are lifted, military will have a free hand. So that is the main issue raised by critics. Then, due to the removal of sanctions, several individuals and companies will come out of the blacklist, and most of them are linked to top brass of army. So, under these circumstances, lifting of sanctions against Myanmar were critically commented by the experts. And the biggest question here is, under these circumstances, can democracy return back to Myanmar? Is the $1 million question. Right friends, with this let us conclude 6th capsule. This is Read Between the Lines, and this is the last capsule for 37th week, and important water dispute as well as the situation after Uri attack in Jammu and Kashmir will be discussed along with 38th week capsules. Have a nice day. Thank you.